Broadcasting live from the School of Athens, this is Europe and the People Without History, everyone's favorite AP World History Review service. On today's episode with Mr. Olson, we will be continuing our discussion of Period 2 with Key Concept 2.2. Key Concept 2.2 says, as the early states and empires grew in number, size, and population, they frequently competed for resources and came into conflict with one another. Go ahead and pause me to put that into your own words. And I'm back. Hopefully you had something along the lines of, as empires grew, they fought. Okay, so Key Concept 2.2 Roman numeral 1 says, the number and size of key states and empires grew dramatically as rulers imposed political unity on areas where previously there had been competing states. Okay, so the College Board's concept outline wants you to be able to identify key empires and sort of imperial developments during this time period, and they want you to be able to identify where they were. So let's go through them. I'm going through them in no particular order. Not necessarily, it's not chronological, it's sort of geographic, but just know that you can deal with them in whatever order you'd like. I'm going to start with my favorite, though, the Persians. The Persian Empire was right there at the time, was the biggest empire in history. It encompasses much of the Middle East, penetrates into the Indus Valley, gets a little bit into what is now considered Eastern Europe. Anyways, it was big. Made it into Egypt. It was large. Then, on the other side of Eurasia, we have the Qin and Han dynasties of China. In India, you see the development of the Mauryan and the Gupta dynasties. Right there, that little orange guy is the Phoenicians. You probably remember some of them from period 1. They're small. They're in the modern day area of Lebanon and Syria. The little blue guy there is going to be the Greek city-states. Of course, they're going to develop into that big thing, or Alexander the Great's empire. Alexander the Great's empire had a profound impact on the development of Rome, which sort of encircles the Mediterranean like that. And now if we take a field trip across the Atlantic, we get the Chaco people in southwestern United States, what's now New Mexico. It's the same group of people who will develop into the Pueblo, if you're familiar with them. In the Midwest, Illinois Pride, we have Cahokia, and moving south in Meso or Middle America, we have the Mayans and Teotihuacan. And in South America, during this time period, we have the Moche civilization. So there are the key places, and I'm going to talk in reference to most of those throughout the rest of this discussion. So if you need all right, Key Concept 2.2, Roman numeral 2. Empires and states develop new techniques of imperial administration based in part on the success of earlier political forms. So we're talking here most notably about the centralization of power. How did these empires consolidate their power? One way they did it was by using bureaucracies. Here are just a few examples. These are not exhausted, so you might think of other ones that can be applicable, but these are just a few that we can focus on right now. Persia instituted royal governors called satraps to help oversee their provinces. They helped collect taxes, and they helped a large empire effectively govern itself for a long period of time. The Qin and the Han oversaw their bureaucracies by instituting civil service exams, which made sure that people hired into the government followed the ideals of the emperor in place. In the Han Emperor, if you recall from Key Concept 2.1, they of course aligned with Confucian ideas, and therefore civil service exams heavily tested one's ability to understand Confucianism. The Mauryan dynasty split itself up into provinces which were overseen, and heavy taxes were levied. And then Rome, of course, had its Senate, which made decisions based on the good of all the people. In addition to that, you also had legal systems to control people's behaviors. In Persia, just because I think Persia is amazing, Cyrus is well known for his cylinder, which is sort of like this relic that has been uncovered that shows that the Persians were very humanitarian. We know that they were humanitarian and that they practiced tolerance to people that they conquered, but this cylinder was sort of like one of the first examples of a human rights declaration. So thousands of years before the Declaration of Independence, we have something that actually gave people rights. In the Dynasty, we see the emergence of legalism, which is this idea that you should punish dissenters very harshly because then they won't dissent anymore, and made it very, very difficult to speak out against the government, and therefore the government was sort of had free will to do whatever they wanted. In Rome, you had the 12 tables, which were a series of laws, some good, some bad, that were publicly displayed for everybody to see. The idea was that they apply to everyone equally. This is, of course, where we get the rise of the most wonderful class of workers, lawyers. And then finally, in India, the Edicts of Ashoka, which were these pillars erected by the Emperor Ashoka under the Mauryan dynasty after his conversion to Buddhism, sort of gave everybody throughout the empire an idea of how they should act. We love you, Ashoka. In addition to these things, you see the development of imperial projects. So roads are a big deal throughout many of these empires. Persia is, of course, well known for its royal road. Rome is well known for its elaborate road system that was used and built by soldiers throughout the empire. Lesser known, but I think kind of cool, the Maya had created causeways that connected city-states known as sock bays that allowed many people to move, which of course was useful for the Maya when they were in decline and they needed to move to new areas in order to sustain life. You also see the emergence of defensive fortifications in China. This is the best example, the Great Wall, which of course indicates not only that the emperor has a lot of power, but also that they're being invaded a lot by nomads, especially in China, the nomads to the north. You see the erection of elaborate structures. So in the Maya, you had pyramids, as pictured to the right. In Greece, you had monumental architecture like the Parthenon, and then lesser known in Cahokia, which you can visit if you're from Illinois, nice and close, is down by St. Louis, Illinois Pride. You see the building of these giant mounds that sort of indicate a civilization's influence in an area. You see the emergence of currency or money used to exchange for goods. The Qin and Han dynasties in China were noted for establishing a universal currency. And then throughout all of these empires, you saw armies that were very effective fighting machines. So in Rome, you had the legions. In China, you had the rain of arrows. In Persia, you had a very large and effective army, unless they were fighting the Greeks. Sad day. Key concept 2.2, Roman numeral 3, unique social and economic dimensions developed in imperial societies in Afro-Eurasia and the Americas. So, imperial societies, one of the biggest thing here is we're talking about cities. So cities served as political and cultural centers. Persepolis in Persia was one of those, building project started by Darius and was one of the most impressive cities until, of course, Alexander the Dummy burns it down. And of course, you also see Rome, which is an iconic example of a cultural and political center. The culture side being, of course, the gladiatorial games in the Colosseum. The political side being, of course, that's where the Senate met and where they made a lot of their decisions. At least in the western half. You also see cities being centers of trade. Chang'an in China is the eastern beginning of the Silk Road. Not listed here, but equally as important is Constantinople, which is sort of a crossroads of trade between Eurasia and Europe, the mainland. Constantinople will become more important down the road. You also see cities as important sites of religious rituals, which gives us an opportunity to talk about Teotihuacan, which is pictured to the right. If you stop and take a look at Teotihuacan, you can see a number of things. First of all, they have a street that goes right down the middle, which means that this was built on a grid system. It was planned out. It has temples to various nature-based gods, so one to the moon, one to the sun, one to the temple of the feathered serpent, who is eventually going to be called Quetzalcoatl. And in addition to that, the fact that there's a marketplace, there's a restaurant right there. There's places to live a recognizable life. So these cities were complex, and they show that early civilizations should not be neglected in discussion of complexity. In addition, these empires had complex social structures, which of course many times were continuation of established hierarchies. So in Rome, you had the patrician versus plebeian dichotomy. In many areas, you had slaves. The Chinese social structure is listed or is pictured to the right. One of the things that I like here to point out is that merchants are below peasants. The Chinese had it they figured out well. You also see the use of imperial labor to construct all those massive building projects. Rome and Greece utilized slavery a lot, way more than the Persians did, way more than the Chinese did. If you recall, the Persians outlawed slavery, as did the Mauryans under Ashoka. That's why we love you, Ashoka. The Mayans used slavery a lot, so slavery was certainly a thing. You also see the emergence of corvée labor, which is forced work by free people for no money. The best example of this is the Qin in using its population to build the Great Wall. A lot of the workers who built the Great Wall weren't paid, but they had to do it, or else they would have ended up in jail or dead. So I would have built it. A lot of them died anyways, though, so I guess it's lose-lose. And then also we see the emergence of tribute systems where instead of having large groups of slaves, people are able to stay within an empire and not be harassed by the imperial power if they contribute work. So you see this in the form of Rome when conquered places built roads for the Romans, and you also see it in the Mayan city-states as well. And then, of course, you always see the continuation of the patriarchy. So, especially to note, women in Greece were not allowed to vote. Confucianism in China didn't allow women to play much role in that social structure. And key concept 2.2, Roman numeral 4. The Roman, Han, Persian, Mauryan, and Gupta empires encountered political, cultural, and administrative difficulties that they could not manage, which eventually led to their decline, collapse, and transformation into successor empires or states. So we're talking about the decline of empires here. When thinking about the decline of empires, there are several reasons that probably contributed to the decline of all empires. Some we know a lot about, like the Romans and the Persians. Some we know very little about, like the Mayans. But we can probably assume that empires fall for a variety of reasons. Most of the time, it's not just going to be one thing. So when classifying the reasons that empires fall, we can think about it in terms of internal factors. So poor leadership, which is what we see in the Mauryan dynasty after Ashoka dies. But I mean, who could really live up to him? You also see some Roman emperors like Nero, and then later on when you have like 75 Roman emperors in a year, that aren't as effective. You also see the ineffective administration of government, the decentralization of a once centralized system that you see in the Gupta, which allows it to be sort of susceptible to issues, and it falls quite quickly. You also see the emergence of social tensions like that in China after the Yellow Turban riots, which were the result of an unequal wealth distribution, which I keep warning everybody about America, but nobody ever listens. There was an unequal wealth distribution in the Roman Empire as well, and the people at the bottom aren't just going to go up a river and die. They're going to fight for food. They're going to fight for power if they've been stripped of everything. And empires, sort of as they were hanging on for life, started to do that. You also just saw the basic overextension of an empire. It just got too big. It couldn't effectively govern itself anymore. You see the best examples of that in Rome, which is why Rome has to split itself in half, as indicated by the map over here. The dark purple over here is the eastern half, the light purple over here, the western half. It split itself up in order to more effectively govern, but even that didn't work. By then, Rome was already on its way down. In addition to internal factors, you also have external factors, so disease that enters via trade routes. The bubonic plague enters China. The measles, smallpox enter Rome. These things come in on trade routes. There's really no stopping it. You can't see it, and you don't know it's there until it's already devastating many of the people who live in the area. And then also, and this is probably the one thing that seals the fate of many of the empires, is invasions. So the nomadic invaders who are living on the fringes see an opportunity, rush into the area, and eventually cause the empire to crumble. Anyways, that's all the politics. This is your Buddha, signing off.